You are listening to Small Farms Radio.
I'm Maryrose Livingston. My husband Donn Hughes and I own the Northland Sheep Dairy here in Marathon, New York. Jane and Carl North started this farm in 1987, and they wanted a couple to go into partnership with them and then buy them out. I've been milking cows on and off since 1982. That's what I always thought I was going to be. When I was 9, I went to Ireland for the first time. That's where my mom is from, and I saw a guy milk a cow. Now, I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, so I had no access to farms before that. But when I saw that guy milk a cow, I said, that's it. And I always wanted to be a cow dairy farmer ever since then. I actually say to people I went to college to learn how to milk cows. But I always knew I wanted to farm sustainably. I wanted to farm grass-based because that's what I saw in Ireland.
Welcome to Small Farms Radio, where we share farmers' stories, talk about the problems they face, and try to imagine a food system that works for everyone. I'm your host, Jamie Johnson. Today, we are going to share a story of how Maryrose and her partner Donn came to own their farm by partnering with the previous owners in the early 2000s, and how that experience shaped how they are thinking about transitioning management of their land as they move toward retirement. At the top of this segment, you heard audio from an interview with Maryrose for a series of videos we did back in 2008 called Voices of Experience. Erica Frenet, who manages our online programs, wanted to profile different farms in upstate New York and to include their stories and wisdom in a free Plan Your Farm online course. Donn and Maryrose ran a grass-fed sheep dairy using primarily draft horsepower to produce European-style cave-aged cheese. Their videos on cheese making, on draft horsepower, and infrastructure remain some of the most popular on our YouTube channel to this day. I highly recommend taking the time to watch a few of their videos. There is something beautiful about working horses baling hay. We reached out to Donn and Maryrose recently to see if they would be willing to share their wisdom once again about a different topic, farm transitions. We knew that they had purchased their farm from the previous owners after working in partnership with them for years. We also knew they were planning their own retirement and wanted to see how they were approaching the transition. They invited us out to their farm in late fall to talk. So Erica and I made the 40-minute journey from Ithaca through the rolling hills of central New York to Northland Sheep Dairy in Marathon, New York. We turned onto their long gravel driveway just as the day was heating up. The long drive was lined with trees, with acres of beautiful meadow beyond. We pulled up to the one-story straw bale house and were greeted by Donn and Maryrose at the back door. They put coffee in our hands as we all took our places around the table. I sat back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and listen to their story.
I'm Maryrose Livingston, and I'm here at Northland Sheep Dairy under transition to Northland Sheep Farm.
My name's Donn Hughes, and I'm Maryrose's partner, and we've been at the Northland Sheep Dairy since 2002, and we get most of our power on the farm with draft animals, horses and mules, and they do farm work, and I'm a teamster. I teach people how to work with horses and mules, and I train animals, and I do most of my farm work with horses and mules.
I met you guys in 2005.
Was that when it was?
Yeah. So you had already been here for a few years, and you were just about to start building this house that we're sitting in right now. But the people that you bought the farm from, the people who named it Northland Sheep Dairy, were still living here. Can you paint the picture of like what led up to you landing here in 2002? Like, why this farm, and how did you hear about this opportunity? And
yeah, it was a weird story that we had moved to this area, Central New York, from Washington State. We had bought another farm in Locke when we were still in Washington State. We'd flown out here, looked at a bunch of land, bought this farm in Locke, 90-acre-old dairy farm. We're going to start our own cow dairy, grass-fed cow dairy, and make cheese. And we lived at that farm for about 4 months and went, you know what, we don't like this farm. It's the wrong place. So we decided we didn't want to stay there, but we still had to find someone else to buy it, and we needed to do more research about cheese making and everything. And during that time, when we were still living at the farm in Locke, I was a member of the American Cheese Society, and I looked in the membership directory and found Jane and Carl North lived nearby. They were also members, and they had a sheep dairy. And so I was just curious to see how they set up their cheese-making facility, because that was something we were going to do regardless. So we came here to visit them, and the very first day that we came to visit them, they said, well, you know what? We're looking for somebody to go into partnership with us and buy us out, because we're getting ready to retire. I said, well, we're cow people. Don't know about that, but, we'll be in touch. So we decide we don't want to stay at the farm in Locke, and we go on a big road trip to Europe for 4 months to visit other cheesemakers and get inspiration for our future farm, and hope that our farm in Locke sells while we're gallivanting about. And part of that trip, we worked at a sheep and goat dairy in England with this very famous, now deceased cheesemaker named Mary Holbrook. And I'd never been around sheep before. I loved the sheep. Did not like the goats, still don't like goats. So when we came home, we told Jane and Carl, well, if we can sell that farm, yeah, we'll go into partnership with you. Not knowing how that was going to proceed, but that's how it started.
It's so funny to me to picture you with cattle. Like, in my mind, you are absolutely associated with your flock, your sheep.
Yeah. I've never looked back.
So were Jane and Carl actually advertising this opportunity somewhere?
They were not advertising it, but they had at least one other couple here before us, if not more than that lived here, and they tried to work together, and it didn't culminate in a future.
I think they were pretty much focused on word of mouth, and at that point in that year, they weren't in a hurry.
Yeah,
they were just thinking ahead. They knew what they wanted in the long term, but they were still actively farming here when we came. So it was a gradual process for us to work with them, and then gradually take over business aspects, and then gradually taking over, and then gradually buying the farm from them. So it was a gradual process, which is one of the interesting parts about that.
And did they have, or did all of you collectively have any outside assistance? Was there any organization that was like helping them to figure out how to structure this opportunity? Or
no, it was very difficult, because once we really got to the point of saying, yes, let's make this happen, and what would it look like, there was no template for how they wanted a life estate. They wanted to stay in their house for the near future at least, but then they wanted cash out of the farm so that they could kind of bootstrap something with their daughter who lives in Maine. So there was just nothing on paper for that. Donn actually is the one who just drafted something on paper and said, here's an agreement that maybe we could work with. So no, we had no outside assistance.
Okay. And what was the agreement? Like what you mentioned partnership, so they weren't looking to like immediately transfer the business.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's important to realize that we were here 4 or 5 years before this discussion really got underway in a serious way. Prior to that, it had always been, well, this is something that, we're interested in talking about at some point, but nobody rushed it. Which was good. It was good. It was helpful to take that time to get to know them, to get to know us, for us to get to know and become more committed to the place, so that when we did get around to the nitty gritty, if you will, we had that experience already. And so the agreement was, and so for people that aren't familiar with a life estate means that a person that's selling a property can continue to live there forever. But there are variations, and I think one of the points about the variation is important. Because this will come back when we talk about what we might do. The life estate that they want, when you start with a life estate, you make an assumption on the price. The assumption is, okay, the property is worth X. Now, we're going to devalue it by a certain amount based on the fact that after I sell it to you, I'm still going to stay. And you figure out how much. You figure out how old you are. You figure out how long you might live. You figure out what part of the resources you might be using. And you make an agreement based on a new price that includes those things. So it's less. And we went through that process with them. But in a twist that they had, they wanted to pay rent after the property was paid off. In other words, after we've paid off all of our mortgage and note to them, they want to pay us rent. And the reason I can't speak to this 100%, but I'm pretty sure the reason was because in the back of their minds that despite the fact that they had a life estate, they could stay here forever, they were planning on leaving. By incorporating a rent into the agreement, it meant that we were going to pay a higher, like we would end up paying almost, they offered us the farm at a very good price. We bought this farm at a really good price. That was their commitment to it being farmed. But we paid 100% of that. We didn't actually deduct 25 or 30% based on their life estate, because they're going to pay us back in rent afterwards, which was all, life estates are whatever you make of them. And that's what this was. This was a case of the four of us devising a life estate that would work for the four of us. The rent was a little wonky, but it wasn't impossible. And they ended up never really paying it because once we paid them off, they left.
So in terms of also how part of the agreement worked, so Donn built a barn here when we first got here. We lived in a tent for 6 months, and Donn built a barn with a living space in it because there wasn't living quarters for us. But they paid for those materials. And so that was part of the agreement that we would pay them back for those materials. Is that correct?
No, that was for the house.
Yeah. Well, no, in a way you're kind of right. It was both the barn and the house. So this house we built 4 years later, and again they paid the cost of the construction for this and that. It's a substantial amount of money that they invested in all this stuff, which then got rolled back into our final agreement when we collectively agreed on a value for the entire farm. The amount of money that they had spent on materials for these projects was included, so they are getting paid back.
Right.
But in that case, both parties are getting a great deal because we're getting to build infrastructure that we're desperately going to want and getting all the sweat equity. So when we pay them back, we're only paying for the price of materials in the second place. We still never paid for this house in terms of what it would cost back from somebody else.
Right.
We only ever paid back the money that they spent.
Right. But it also did carry some risk for you in terms of your time, I guess. Not a financial risk, but if things had gone sour and you had invested 4 or 5 years of your life here.
Absolutely.
There was a risk on both parts because you're absolutely right. Because the risk for them was, well, here are people that are starting to make the changes as if they have purchased the place, but they haven't. So if so then you could get stuck with a partially finished project. You could get stuck with a partially finished home that wasn't your design. You could and there's a lot of cash investment on their part. So there was risk on both sides, and that really speaks to. We will touch very lightly on the fact that our relationship with Jane and Carl wasn't always perfect. It had its faults and flaws, but we've never diminished the fact that they were extremely committed to having somebody farm here. Yep. And they were really clear about that, and it had a great impact on these agreements. Great impact on what we paid, what it cost us, the time it afforded us, what things that we've learned from them. As soon as we got here, we appreciated the fact that they had built this farm on a very simple, low input model, and these were not completely new ideas to us, but relatively new. And we learned a ton from them about how the low input farm is what allowed them to have the lifestyle and the farm that they wanted, and it would be very difficult otherwise. And so we benefited a ton from that.
The other thing that we had going for us is that we actually had some financial resources. We came with financial resources from our previous careers. We had savings that we had planned to spend on a farm. We finally sold the farm and lot, by the way. So, and that was important to the agreement as well. Even though they paid for the materials, there was other things that we contributed. We also, when we finally transferred the farm, we bought the business and the inventory, the animals, everything for cash. And we had that cash, and we had money for a down payment. And we had the ability to make our payments and never miss one. And actually, we paid off the note early. So that was also important, that, we made good on our end and they made good on their end. And they did not charge us interest.
When I think about, and this will probably come up again later also, but when I think about, I was just thinking about this morning before we sat down, that, how our experiences in transition could be informative or useful to other people. I realized the benefit, the luxury, whatever you want to call it, that we had of having resources to begin with, because we've been afforded this. We think about how we've been afforded this great opportunity and how we capitalized on it. We were afforded from Jane and Carl how we capitalized on it, but we also had resources, and so somebody else trying to model or reproduce what we've done would still come upon barriers. It's for the farm owner wanting to share with the next generation, what do they want to have out of something versus what do they need to have out of something, and those two, somewhere in between those two places is where the opportunity may lie, but it's never going to be zero. Almost no one can give something away for nothing.
Yeah.
And so that's where the trick will still be.
We were older too. We were about 40.
And there's a big difference in resources between being 40 and being 20.
Yeah.
And what farm experience did you have prior to this? Like, did you come in already knowing how to graze animals? I mean, you had done the tour in Europe, so you had learned how to make cheese?
Yeah, I was making some cheese. Yeah, not professionally, but yeah, I had some skills there. I had animal handling skills. I'd milked cows for years, so milking was my jam. Learning sheep was easy, relatively. So we had farm experience.
It's a funny question though, because I think, to me, if anything, it suggests that the farm experience wasn't the greatest asset that we had. We definitely have some. Maryrose more than me. I actually feel that I've learned and experienced 99% of my farming here. So we had some maturity and some life lessons, and we had a few experiences, and Maryrose more than me.
And Donn had all those construction skills, which were incredibly handy.
We had some life skills, but our farm experience wasn't what made this happen.
No, I'm just thinking about, I didn't mean to imply that, but like, we encounter so many beginning farmers who have none of those hands-on skills and have the idea of farming. And so I think it sounds to me though, like you at least had enough life experience to know that for sure this is what you wanted. Absolutely. This wasn't something that you were dreaming about because it sounded better than your cubicle job or whatever, but you had some real skills to be able to make it happen. Yeah, no,
that's absolutely true. And Donn had draft horses. We moved across the country with draft horses.
We had just enough we had just enough experiences to really have a clear-eyed idea of what we wanted to do, Right. And this just made an incredible opportunity for us to really take that forward. I mean, I don't know, Maryrose probably feels similarly. I feel like I've learned so much here. I've done prior to coming here, my ambition to work with draft animals was a dream. And I was pursuing it. I was doing it, but I've been able to do it here to such an extent. The things that I've learned, the things I've done here. Just as a side note, it's interesting to point out, and this is not to gloat or brag, I've been incredibly fortunate to learn those building skills as a very young person. And as a suggestion to anybody else, man, being able to build a pole barn or a home or a shed or a fence is so valuable. It's obvious, really, in hindsight, but it's been invaluable to us. The economics of being able to, when I want to build a building, when I want to build a shed for an animal, it's like, that takes me 5 minutes to figure out what I'm going to do. And that's a huge asset.
For sure.
It's just a huge asset, and other people don't have that. And I'm always, oh man, what a bummer.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned, aside from transitioning and buying the property, you purchased Carl and Jane North's business. How did you determine the value of that, the business name, the customers, the inventory, all of that stuff?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. What I remember is we basically put a number on the cheese inventory and the animals. I think very little was attributed to the actual reputation or name.
Again, their commitment to having us farm here, in some ways, it may not have been implicit, but it was close to implicit. Like farming here, like they did, was super high. And I know, I guess I couldn't tell you the exact dollar amount we paid for the business. It was extremely affordable. It was not like, somebody trying to like calculate our future wealth and working backwards from that to a price for the business. It was not like that. It was like, well, there's 50 sheep and there's a cave with last year's cheese in it. You'd have to pay for those things.
Right.
And there's some old retired equipment that isn't worth very much. And
I have in my mind it was 20-some thousand, like $25,000 bucks.
I think it was $25,000.
Yeah.
Is what it was, which in long range, when you think of the things we got for that,
right? And I'd been working for them. I'd been an employee of the farm. Very, very rudimentary keeping of hours. I can assure you, I worked much more than they paid me for, so I was milking sheep and making cheese here. So my labor had gone into that inventory as well. So
yeah, but it was a transition. It was a transition, and it was a way for us to pay them, give them something for all the things that they had done for us.
So it sounds like the whole process from start to finish it sounded like it was a good 4 years or so of you living here, working here, starting to talk about a transition, but not actually like actively moving towards transition. And then once you signed an agreement with them, they were gone pretty soon after that?
They lived here for quite a while. They left the business, and like I said, our relationship with them was not perfect, as you can imagine in any farm anywhere, especially if you are invested in how things are, how things were, how things were made. Those are hard. Those transitions will be hard for anyone. You cannot be the person of the best intentions. And when somebody turns something around differently than the way you've always done it, I don't care who you are, that is hard. And we went through that with Jane and Carl. And their reaction or response in some ways was, we've come this far. We've shown you the things we can show you. We're going to let you take over. And that was what happened, for better or for worse. And it worked out good. It relieved some pressure, it relieved some stress.
Absolutely.
And Maryrose became a full-time shepherd and a full-time cheesemaker, and we made the hay way we wanted to, and we took over the business. But they stayed. They lived here for 5 or 6 or 7 more years.
Oh, okay.
And that's one thing people don't always realize. That, they were really here until about 2012, I think. And we were well into paying off the mortgage, and then at the end we just paid off the rest of it, and it sort of freed them up to go. They had some things that they wanted to do in Maine. They had a place they wanted to move to, and that's what they went and did. But it was a while. We were all living here together for almost 10 years total.
And looking back on that time, you've referenced how the communication, the relationship wasn't always stellar, and like you said, that's understandable because change would be really hard. But are there lessons or, things that you wish had happened differently or that you would do differently if you were doing it over again? Well,
you're starting to, I think, tap into like what have Maryrose and I done for the last 10 years, which I think is a reflection on us and our style and our personality. And so once Jane and Carl left, there was a house here that was vacant because we'd built our own house. Now there's 2 houses and an apartment. And we've had young people here ever since then. And never with the expectation that, that we're looking for a successor, just creating opportunity, creating space, creating places for people. And I think this is an outcome of our experience with Jane and Carl, although this is a reflection of what we think we might have learned from it. This is an example of something I'd say we're doing a little bit differently. And
so, very different personalities.
Different people, different personalities, but also things that we learned. So like what, I guess in one of the things that I've thought about recently in thinking about transition, and one of the things I'd say more than once in this podcast if I can, is today I think of our transition as transition every day. Maryrose and I will never turn this farm over to our kids because we don't have any. So that's not, I feel a little sorry for people with kids that have this struggle of will my kids be my successor? Yeah. I love the fact that people raise children on farms. It's just my fear would be, am I going to struggle with what are my kids going to do? And that, I can see how hard that would be. I can see why you would have that desire for them to do that, and I can see why you want to have the freedom for them to be whoever they're going to be. We don't have that. There is no chance of that. So the alternative to us was bring young people in, have them live here, work here, develop themselves here, develop their own ideas here. And I guess one of the things that we've been pursuing more and more over time is figuring out between us how to make them feel invested in this place. Whether it's not just ownership, it's not just title. In fact, it turns out it's very little that. It seems like it's that, but it's really not. It's really just about making them feel that they can invest in something. They can delve into something.
Yeah, we've always wanted people who have been here to, if they want to start their own farm business, sure, great. Doesn't have to be Northland sheep dairy. You want to grow vegetables, you want to have raw cow milk dairy, whatever. So we have had that.
And so that's a difference from how you felt when you got here, like you didn't feel necessarily that freedom?
Right. And that was actually fine because once I discovered dairy sheep in England, I was completely in love anyway, so it was a really good fit.
I think the thing that's different is that in their mind it was either going to be they were going to run a farm and we were going to, it was the same farm. They were either going to run a farm and we were going to be the workers, or vice versa. And I think the thing that we discovered is there could be other alternatives to that. And maybe I sound like I'm judging them. I'm not. I think it's something that we learned from them. I think a thing that other people could learn as well is like how to free ourselves from this idea that it's mine or yours. If it's just going to be 100% run by Maryrose and I, then we could have workers, and we don't want workers. We've never had employees. We've had interns. We have interns because we like to teach. You can call it whatever you like, but anybody that knows us knows that the people that have been here, the reason they've been here is because we wanted to teach or share. And that's the lesson that we learned, and that's the lesson we're going to try to apply going forward into transition.
Yeah, so I've retired from cheese making. I've sold the equipment. Northland sheep dairy doesn't exist anymore.
Couple wheels of cheese left.
Yeah, a couple wheels of cheese.
That we can eat.
And we have folks here who have a family milk cow. They're making cheese. There's cheese in my cave that's made from cow's milk. It's horrifying. But, that didn't seem important to me. If somebody wanted to keep Northland sheep dairy going, that would have been great. But, I sold equipment to some folks who actually had been here, living here, and working here, and now are farming in Vermont. That's where most of my dairy equipment has gone. So it continues, just not with our name. Just fine.
And so how are you thinking about transition, in terms of timeline? In terms of your goals, what do you want?
Yeah, we never want to leave here. We're going to die here. put us in the compost. But, we're definitely slowing down. We're both in our 60s. I was talking with Paul Knapp the other day, who's up there, and we were talking about, we both still really love farming, but boy, we sure get a lot less done than we used to when we were younger. So that's definitely happening. I definitely see that. I always said, your body is your tool. Well, the tool is getting worn out. So definitely there's still the ability to do a lot here for somebody who's invested. And we've had couples in the house that people seem to stay for like 3 years. And then they kind of move along, do something else. But we've had a couple here for
about 3 years.
3 years. And they're in it for the long haul. I think we had the discussion just pretty recently, the official discussion. I think they're going to be our successors. And that's very exciting. They're doing completely different stuff than we did. But still, one of the common themes we've always had with everyone who's been here is that they must have an interest in draft horsepower. And so that there has always been that commonality. So they are using draft horses to grow medicinal and culinary herbs. They have the family milk cow. Who knows what else they may do, but it looks like they're into it.
Yeah, so, and again, when she says the discussion, it was the discussion where we bring up the suggestion of the idea. It wasn't the discussion to iron out any details. This was the discussion where we said, you guys have been here a while and we really love what you're doing and maybe you want to think about. But in terms of economics and practicality, we'll probably try and achieve a life estate similar to what Jane and Carl did. But the only difference will be we will create a dollar value for everything that's here, and then we will subtract a portion. I don't know if it's a quarter or a third or what, but it'll be a significant portion of that total that we'll take off the top in exchange for the value of our life estate. So basically you're going to buy it, but you're going to have two old fogies puttering about on your place, and that's exciting to me. Like I said, I've really started to think a lot that transition should happen every day. It's been a joy for me. I recently retired from the fire department, and that's been tricky. Retiring from something I did for 40 years was hard, and I'm still working on figuring out some of the fine details. It's been a joy for me to watch Maryrose. She has transitioned from the sheep dairy to the shepherd in a beautiful way. It's like she spends more time doing the things she loves than she did before. She spends more time walking with her dogs than she did before. So this is like brilliant, And she said we could do this forever. And that's one way to think of transition, is find those pieces that are the absolute best part and try and stretch them out, and then leave space, and that leaves space for other people.
Yeah.
And we tell people all the time, the funnest thing happening on our farm today is what other people are doing. That's the most exciting thing that's happening here today. So just carve out some space for that to happen.
There was a very interesting portion of our conversation about the succession, and again, it is just the very beginning conversation, and they did ask us, they said, have you made any plans for end-of-life care for yourselves?
Well, I was thinking about that because,
totally legit
you
question.
Staying here, does that include them then being your caretakers? Or?
We were always super afraid of that with Jane and Carl.
We thought we would be their caretakers.
We assumed we would.
Yep.
So we pretty much told them, we're going to be here. You're going to have to deal with it.
No, that's not what I said. I said we'll definitely be here, but it's not on them to deal with it.
Well, no, we I don't know how far into all that we can get, but I think
it is something to think about.
There is another. Again, we talked earlier about how our midlife situation helped us be able to move here, both financially and resource-wise. It's worth pointing out again that the transition for us to another generation, again, it's not as simple as, here's something anybody can do. We have a off-farm retirement we don't have a 401k. We're not rich, but we do have a check from the state for the work that I did, and we have Social Security. And so the life estate, when we get paid to transition this farm, goes on top of those things. As far as our being able to afford our lives, the money that we get from that goes on top of that. Now, if we had been solely farmers and not had that retirement check from the state, then the money that somebody would have to pay us to move in here and replace us would probably be more, because we would need more to live. So once again, resources that we have, that we're fortunate to have, are helping make these transitions easier. And it's important to not deny that. You know?
Yeah, no, that's an important.
The life estate is going to be the capping piece of the other sources of income that we will have, you know.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what kind of agreement we want to have, it really is just about keeping the land and agriculture. We don't really have a land trust out here that's interested in any of this land. We're too far outside of fancy places. I don't think there's any conservation easement we could put on this place, because I don't think anyone's worried about it.
When you mentioned earlier that we had an agreement with Jane and Carl, and we did write it, and there were some organic components to it, and I always like that. There is some talk about what this farm is about.
Yeah.
And we talked about this with our friends the other day. It's like, we can do that again. We can say that this is a farm that is largely based on grass, that it's largely based on, that it's organic, that it's that draft animal power is integral or important, that how social relationships are built and maintained is important. And those things were in our last agreement, and they'll probably be in our next agreement, you know. So that's one of the interesting little pieces of that. You have to read to the second or third page to find them, but you know, that's the community aspect of it. It's written in there, you know. It's kind of a fun part of that process to think about, you know, why are we all here?
Yeah.
You know, what are we actually sharing? When I'm an old man, I'm gonna have a donkey, and I'm gonna walk down the street with a cart just selling stuff. That'd be like the very last thing that I do.
Yeah, various ideas. Like first it was you selling rags or pots and pans, and then I thought, well, we'll have the donkey-drawn paella truck.
Oh, I think I read a book to my kids with a character like that in it when they were really small.
That's you know. So I'm planning on pushing it just as far as I can.
Yeah.
Walking down the street with my donkey, singing my song.
I'll just have my old bark and huntaways and my nice white Dorper sheep.
Sounds like a beautiful vision.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of selling things out of a donkey cart with my last breath. I hope the story of how Donn and Maryrose came to own their farm and how they are thinking about their transition can provide a bit of a guide to farmers who don't have family to take over but would like to stay on their farm. Their story also highlights a path to farm ownership that I don't think many young farmers are considering. In this age of expensive land, beginning farmers may find that there are people out there looking to retire and who care about their land and how it's farmed, looking for the right person to buy them out. This is a topic that is tough to think about, let alone talk about. So all the gratitude out to Donn and Maryrose for sharing their story with us. Speaking of sharing, if you would like to share your story about a flood, a fire, or any other type of disaster, and how you've made changes to be better prepared for future disasters, please leave us a message at 607-255-4455. Please give us your name and number and a brief teaser of the story you would like to share. You can also email us at smallfarmsprogram@cornell.edu. That's our show for today. See you next time.